Jenga taifa, jiepushe na uvivu, tujenge taifa. Ndugu yangu, umekucha, amka twende shamba.
In the year ended June 2019, Kenya Power only raked in a paltry 262 million in net profit out of the enviable revenues of 133 billion Kenya shillings. This actually translated to a 92% drop in net profit the company made in a similar period in 2018. Now, Kenya Power is only a pale shadow of the perilous journey to financial distress many Kenyan state corporations are on. What actually brought them to these murky waters? Besides, can they change tact for the better? An economist, KIGEN Abdulahi, tells us more. Well, KIGEN, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
All right.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you.
One thing that we must come to understand is that the Big Four agenda has been sort of politicized in this country. And you know, Kenya is a very politically polarized country. You know, today we have BBI, tomorrow we have this. And I am so disturbed that the Big Four agenda has been politicized, and it's very, very dangerous, because politics and economy, the political economy in this country, is one marriage that is very abusive. And I need not to mention, you know, who comes at the top every time. You know, the economy is always, you know, under hit by the political class. Absolutely. And when we look at the cases of government corporations like the IDB, the Industrial Development Bank, we have the KTDC, the Kenya Tourism Development Corporation. We also have KIA, the Kenya Industrial Enterprise. We also have the Agricultural Development Corporation. And you'll notice one thing, that as millennials and the people who are currently at universities, they are not very conversant with these corporations. And the reason is very simple. These corporations are struggling to pay their rent premises. Totally. You know, and this came out, they suffered the same fate as the government banks like KRAP, which has now rebranded into CDN and Consolidated Banks, where government officials used to go in and borrow huge amount of loans, and they would never pay, because at the end of the day, they were the government. And you see, so at the end of the day, the revenues will never come out, because these corporations, you know, have been struck down simply by the political class.
So it might be a far-fetched dream, the Big Four agenda, achieving that by 2020.
I think it is a far-fetched dream, and I say this because I am a very pragmatic person.
All right.
And I think most of us have seen in the social media arguments being made by economists and also politicians, particularly on the housing item, yeah, you know, on the Big Four agenda. And they are saying that the timeline that has remained for President Uhuru Kenyatta, he can't be able, you know, to build the 500,000 houses units. Right. You know, so it's, for me, from an economic perspective, it's not practical.
Well noted. KIGEN, of note is the ongoing merger plan for state firms, looking at those executing similar roles and also scrapping off of those that are poorly performing. Is this the ultimate solution to the problem at hand? And it's worth to remember that many jobs will be at stake. How do you see this?
They say that we give credit when it's due, and from where I sit, I want to give credit to the Ministry of Finance, of the Treasury and Planning, you know, for this great move, because I believe that at the end of the day, these state corporations, they are businesses. True. And what is the point of running a business if it's not profitable in the first place? And looking at one of the most recent, this was an acquisition by the Kenya Commercial Bank, KCB, acquired the National Bank. Yeah. And the National Bank had been struggling, and the government has stakes in both the companies, and that is why the merger was even easily facilitated, because, you know, the government has stakes in both. Yeah. And I think it was a great move, because why have on the other end, you know, National Bank really struggling, you know, and on the other side KCB doing very well, one of the top banks in East Africa actually, because they are in Uganda, they are rolling out also in Ethiopia.
It actually is the game changer in the banking industry.
Absolutely, and they are doing great work, and you can see the great work they've done with KCB M-Pesa. Absolutely. You know, so what I'm saying is that why have a struggling corporation on this side and a good one on this side, merge them and do a good work. There is also a merger that is coming up with the IDB, the Industrial Development Bank, and the Kenya Tourism Development Corporation. And these are two very struggling. They're struggling themselves, so they are trying to bring them together and for an effort. And you've also mentioned something very important, from the economics angle, the job creation thing. Because some jobs will be lost, absolutely. Definitely. Because there are two mines are being brought into one. True. But let's look at the long-term effect. Right. Because if these two corporations are brought together and they do very well, at the end of the day, in 5-10 years, they'll end up employing more people than they had retrenched earlier. Absolutely. Yeah.
To another front, KIGEN, we have actually seen 2.2 billion Kenya shillings out of the 292.9 billion shillings that is owned by these state corporations being paid. This is actually a revelation by the CS himself a fortnight ago. Remember, 70% of these pending bills are owed to SMEs. Isn't this taking a step forward and 6 back in a quest to grow SMEs in this country?
You may say that this is taking one step forward and taking a couple of them backwards. But for me, I'd say that we are cutting our legs in the first place. We are not even walking. Allow me to liken this to the current cash crunch that we are having with devolution. 90 billion Kenya shillings is being owed to suppliers by the counties, the 47 counties.
Government.
Yeah, and you can imagine 90 billion is not a joke from an economics angle. And this money, as you've said, is being owed to small-scale suppliers, the SMEs. And SMEs is mostly comprised of young people. Totally. People who are still schooling, some who have just recently finished their studies, who are trying to get a grip into the economy. And it is demoralizing, because it shows them that you guys are going nowhere in the first place. And this also is a trigger, and it precipitates corruption and precipitates high amount of high inflations, for goods that the taxpayers are buying at the end of the day. Totally. And let me start with the issue of corruption, because you'll find that the money that has been allocated maybe to these state corporations have, or the county governments, is maybe a third of what they owe to the suppliers. So the thing of kickback comes in. It's like you pay us something, we release your money. You pay us something, we release your money. And you can imagine what that can do to people. Another thing is the thing of highly priced, astronomical figures that are being put for things. You're seeing 20,000 Kenya shillings for a chopping board in Baringo County, where I come from. This is insane. And people don't just price things this way because they want a lot of money. No, it's because me, as a young person, I'm supplying this chopping board to Baringo County. I know that Baringo County is going to pay me in the next 10 years. So I have to cater for the interest. Right. So I have to cater for the delayed money and the damaging losses that I'd go through. So you find that this kind of cash crunches, they fight back even harder.
All right. To another front, we've actually seen there being a disconnect in assessing performance in these state-owned enterprises. From an economic standpoint, do we focus more on commercial efficiency rather than social welfare?
So there are two things that we must distinguish, right. Government corporations and infrastructure. When it comes to government corporations, I think the litmus test should be profitability, because these are businesses. In as much as they have a social responsibility for development, it is still a business. They need to pay the employees. The business themselves need to pay the employees and cater for the bills, and the running costs and everything. So for me, that is strictly we have to test it and we have to counter-check it in accordance to its profitability. Totally. But when it comes to infrastructure, we must understand that the government builds infrastructure not simply for profitability or if it pays back. And I've always been having a problem when I'm making arguments about this concerning the SGR, because some people are saying that the SGR cannot repay itself back, and I'm saying no, the SGR wasn't built to repay itself in 2, 5 or 10 years. The SGR will run for 100 years plus. And it's same for electricity, like the last mile connectivity that we had by the Kenya Power. This kind of infrastructure should not be measured by profitability, because the impact is phenomenal. Because when we say that we have this place, there are a lot of industries, so we should connect electricity, because they are going to pay back, they're going to pay electricity bills, and we're going to have a lot of revenue. And in this other place, it's a marginalized area, the population is very low, so we shouldn't connect electricity there. That's totally wrong, because in that place, that marginalized place where the population is low, there is that one grandmother, in a grass hatched house, and he has a grandchild, and that small boy or girl just needs an illumination from a bulb to read and become a CEO or the president of the country tomorrow. So infrastructure can never be measured in terms of profit and like that. But again, when you've mentioned something to do with accountability, and when I just heard about that, something struck me. Edward Ouko, the former Auditor General, left office in August. This is March 2020. We don't have an Auditor General. Where are we going in terms of accountability?
Well, KIGEN, let's culminate this with this bone of contention. We've actually seen unethical procurement processes in these very state corporations being the center stage for inefficient spending. Now, how can we curtail these flawed processes, which in many cases even involves the very same boards that were meant to do the oversight work?
I don't think I've ever seen, any sector that is marred by corruption like the procurement sector. And particularly this is because when someone is in the process of acquiring a tender from a government organization, the issue of the highest bidder comes in. And trust me, the highest bidder is not in reference to the quotations that have been done on the papers, but the highest bidder in terms of who is giving more kickbacks. That is the person who receives the tender at the end of the day. And I think the Kenyan media has been struggling, and really bringing up the issue of where people are procuring things, that are very expensive and are out of the price levels that are in the market.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
I think one thing that we haven't looked at is the point of us procuring things that we don't need in the first place. You have seen so many things like hospital equipment that are being brought, that are in the level 5 hospitals. There are no even the human practitioners who are there to look after the machines and take care of them and make them into use. And these are procurement things that, why do you bring something that that a practitioner does not even exist in Kenya? So we are procuring so many things that we are not needing simply because one procurement is a kickback coming in. And one thing that I've seen is that if there is somebody who has been frustrated in this country, is the former Auditor General Edward Ouko, because his flag was always up. He flagged so many things. If you could read in the reports, so many things that were being flagged out, but we could see very little action from the DPP and the DCI.
Totally.
So it is not an issue of the corruption cases and the charges that are coming up out of the procurement sector not being known. It is known. It's just that the government's will is not different from that of a millipede.
All right. And how can you now tackle the issue of these very same boards? These are people entrusted to ensure these procurement processes are very transparent, but they are part of these corruption schemes in these very same corporations. What's the way forward for them?
I think what we need is an overhaul in the system, and something that we particularly need in our government institutions is the military type of discipline. And we have seen these things change. When Dr. Fred Matiang'i went into the education sector and there was an overhaul, people stopped stealing exams. The results were being released at a very convenient time. You couldn't have to wait for almost a year to get your results, your KCSE results. And things are currently working in the education sector. Even the buses, there is order. The buses have been painted yellow. There is so much order in the education sector. So that strikes hope in me that these things can be done. We just need the right amount of leadership and a change, a shift in the culture of our institutions.
All right. So sending people homes will be the way. If you are not competent enough, you are shown the door.
Absolutely. Because one thing that we must remember is government organizations and corporations are funded by Kenyan taxpayers. People who wake up very early, you go to Marigiti and at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., these people are pushing cocotenis and they are paying taxes. It's their blood and their sweat, and they are doing everything that they can, to put forward their taxes and licenses they pay, and it is only fair that justice be done to them and they get what they deserve in terms of services by the government.
All right. Each financial year, the government allocates 500 million Kenya shillings for failing corporations. However, This figure is set to increase by the years, showing recommendations on how to revise them into prudent trajectories be sidelined. Richard Mwanja from the University of Nairobi.
Ndio adui wa ujenzi wa taifa, jiepushe na uvivu, tujenge taifa. Ndugu yangu, umekucha, amka twende shamba, jiepushe na uvivu, tujenge taifa.